Part 1, The Beginning. The wind had a cruel voice that night. It moved over the Yorkshire moors like something alive, hissing through dead grass, brushing against stone fences, and rattling the shutters of a roadside pub that stood like a lone survivor in an empty world. Inside, where the fire burned low and the ale was cheap, Ethan Caldwell sat hunched over his glass, his reflection warped by amber liquid and regret. He looked like a man who used to run fast but had nowhere left to run. At 30, Ethan had burned through more lives than most men twice his age. Mountain climbs gone wrong, base jumps in bad weather, bets that had turned to debts. The rush was all that ever made him feel alive, but the fall always came after. £92,315 worth of falls, to be exact. He traced a finger across the bar, watching a drop of condensation crawl down his glass. Outside, thunder rolled far off, like something ancient stirring beneath the moor. Still chasing ghosts, Caldwell. The voice came from behind him, smooth, unhurried, but carrying something that made Ethan's skin prickle. He turned. A tall man stood in the dim light of the doorway, dressed in a long black coat, his face gaunt and pale as chalk. His eyes, grey and hollow, did not blink. "I'm sorry, do I know you?" Ethan asked. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Not yet, but I know you, Mr. Caldwell. You're a climber, the kind who doesn't stop even when there's nothing left to climb." Ethan frowned. "If you're here to talk about sponsorships, you're about 3 years too late." The man ignored the sarcasm. He pulled out a small envelope and placed it gently on the bar. The sound it made was soft, deliberate, like the beginning of a ritual. "I represent an organization," he said. "We call ourselves the Umbra Network. We value determination, obsession even, you have both." Ethan looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. "What kind of organization are we talking about?" "The kind that offers opportunities to men who have run out of them." The bartender glanced their way, uneasy. The stranger's presence seemed to drain the warmth from the room. Even the fire crackled softer, as if listening. Ethan forced a laugh. "And what kind of opportunity involves tracking down washed-up climbers in pubs?" The man's gaze sharpened. "There's a tower on the western moor, an old telecommunications structure, 2,500 feet tall, abandoned since the 90s. We want you to climb it." Ethan blinked. "You're serious?" "Quite. Why, maintenance, photography?" The man tilted his head, as though puzzled by the question. "Let's call it reclamation." That word lingered in the air, heavy and wrong. Ethan tried to shake it off. "You know that tower's condemned, right? Steel's probably huff-ruttered. You're talking about suicide." The man smiled again, thin, serpentine. "You've danced with death before, that's why we chose you. Reach the summit, complete the task, and you'll receive £92,315. Ethan froze. The exact number. His mouth went dry. "How do you?" "Umbra knows what it must," the man said softly. "Debt is a chain, we offer release." He slid a contract from the envelope. The parchment was smooth, strangely heavy, as if written on something older than paper. At the bottom, a space waited for Ethan's signature. "This isn't funny," Ethan muttered. "You some kind of collector?" "Think of me as a messenger." Ethan hesitated. The thought of that number, that suffocating weight, began to pulse behind his eyes. All the calls, the threats, the sleepless nights, it could all disappear. One climb, one more rush. His gut twisted. There was something wrong about the man, about the way his eyes never moved, the way the firelight didn't seem to reflect in them. He reached for the contract anyway. "Read it carefully," the man advised. The words on the page were simple. "Ascend the structure, reach the altar, complete the rite." Nothing else. Ethan looked up. "What the hell does this mean?" "You'll understand when you're there," the man said. He slid a small black key across the table. It was cold to the touch, etched with a spiral symbol that seemed to twist when Ethan looked at it too long. "Bring this with you," the man said. "It opens what must be opened." Ethan's breath clouded in the air. He hadn't realized how cold the room had become. "And if I say no?" he asked. The man leaned closer. His breath smelled of iron. "Then the debt remains, and debts, Mr. Caldwell, have a way of collecting themselves." Silence. Somewhere outside, the wind screamed against the windows like a living thing. Ethan stared at the signature line, the pen shaking slightly in his hand. He thought about the phone calls, the final notice letters, the days he couldn't face leaving his flat. He thought about the cliffs he'd scaled without ropes, the mountains he'd conquered just to feel a heartbeat again. And he thought about freedom, what it might taste like. He signed. When he looked up, the man was already standing by the door. "You'll find the tower on the western ridge," he said. "Leave before dawn, and Mr. Caldwell." Ethan swallowed. "What?" The man's lips barely moved. "Once you start climbing, don't look down." He left without another sound. The door swung open, and a gust of freezing wind swept through, snuffing out the last of the fire. Ethan sat there for a long time, staring at the contract. The ink shimmered faintly as though alive. When he finally folded it into his jacket, he noticed something carved into the table where the man had sat. A spiral the same as the key. Yorkshire MOORS dawn. The next morning the world was made of fog and silence. The moors stretched in every direction, culkless, endless. Ethan's old Land Rover rattled along the narrow dirt track, tires crunching over frost. He hadn't slept. The man's words haunted him. Every mile felt like a descent into something deeper than geography, like he was leaving the world behind. At last, through the mist, he saw it. The tower. It rose from the earth like a blade thrust into the sky, black steel bones disappearing into the clouds. The structure groaned in the wind, ancient yet defiant, covered in rust and ivy. A chain-link fence surrounded it, warning signs faded to ghosts. Ethan stepped out of the vehicle. The air tasted of metal. His breath came in white clouds. He touched the fence, and the steel vibrated faintly beneath his hand, like a heartbeat. For a moment he thought he heard whispers carried on the wind. Faint, indistinct, names maybe. He shook it off and opened the gate. It creaked like an old grave. At the tower's base, the concrete was cracked and darkened with time. Someone had been here before. He could see old pitons, rope fragments, even a torn glove half buried in the dirt. His stomach tightened. "Maintenance crew," he muttered to himself. "That's all." He tried to believe it. He pulled on his climbing harness, checked his carabiners, tightened the straps on his gloves. The air around him felt charged, as though the world itself was holding its breath. From his pocket he took out the black key. For a moment it pulsed faintly in the fog. "Whatever this is," he whispered, "I'm getting my money's worth." He clipped the key onto his belt, took one last look at the empty moor, and began to climb. The first few feet were easy, cold metal, slick but solid. The wind whistled through the latticework, moaning like a voice. But as he ascended, the ground disappeared beneath him. The horizon dissolved into mist. He climbed higher, the air thinning, the tower groaning beneath his weight. Somewhere above, a cable swung loose, clattering against the steel. When he glanced up, he thought, just for an instant, he saw a shadow move along the upper rungs. Too fluid, too fast. He froze. "Hello." Only the wind answered. A piece of torn rope fluttered past him, falling into the fog below. Ethan's pulse hammered. He wanted to turn back, he almost did. But then he remembered the number, £92,315. He gritted his teeth and kept climbing. Up there, somewhere above the clouds, something was waiting. And Ethan Caldwell, for better or worse, was already bound to meet it. Part 2, The Ascent and the Tower's Secrets. The tower stretched into infinity. Steel ribs crisscrossed above him, vanishing into the clouds like veins of some metallic beast. Each gust of wind made the entire structure hum, a deep, resonant vibration that Ethan could feel through his gloves, through the marrow of his bones. He climbed with steady precision, one carabiner at a time, his breath loud in the cage of his helmet. Below him, the world had already disappeared. The moors were swallowed by mist, leaving only endless grey. It felt less like he was ascending a tower and more like he was leaving reality itself. At 400 feet, he found the first anomaly. A frayed climbing rope dangling from a higher beam, whipping in the wind. Its end was blackened as though scorched. The fibers curled inward like flesh burned by fire. Ethan grabbed it, examining the texture, brittle, ancient. He frowned. How long have people been climbing this thing? The question hung unanswered. He clipped the rope aside and continued upward. The higher he went, the stranger the sounds became. What began as mere wind began to shape itself into whispers, distant, indistinct. They seemed to echo inside the steel rather than around it, threading through the lattice like voices trapped in the metal. Sometimes he thought he could make out words, "Don't look down." Other times it was just the suggestion of human breath in the storm. By 700 feet his muscles burned. The climb had grown harder, frost on the metal, rust flacking under his fingers. He stopped on a small platform, catching his breath. His radio, strapped to his chest, crackled to life with static. He froze. He hadn't turned it on. A voice emerged, faint, distant, trembling. "Caldwell, is that you?" Ethan's blood ran cold. He snatched the radio. "Who is this? How do you know my name?" Only static. Then a long, slow scream distorted by the signal. The sound was human but wrong, as though stretched too far. He ripped the radio off his harness and threw it into the void below. It vanished into fog without a sound. The silence that followed felt heavier than before. At 1,000 feet, the tower began to change. The pattern of the beams was no longer symmetrical. The architecture twisted subtly, spiraling in directions that defied logic. His sense of balance began to shift. He couldn't tell if he was climbing up or sideways anymore. Each time he looked away, the structure seemed different. He found a glove lodged between two girders, torn, stiff with dried blood. The initials R. Hale were scratched into the leather. Ethan stared at it for a long moment. He remembered the rumours, the climber who went missing years ago while attempting a free ascent in Yorkshire. No body ever found. He swallowed hard. Maybe this tower wasn't abandoned after all. As he climbed past the glove, something clattered above him. A loose bolt or footsteps. He tilted his head upward, just in time to see a shadow move across the next platform. "Hello," he shouted. "Is someone there?" No response, only the wind moaning through the framework like a voice grieving. Then came the smell, faint, metallic, sharp, blood. He reached the platform and saw what had fallen. A helmet cracked in two. Inside, a dark smear glistened in the faint light. Ethan stared at it, heart hammering. What the hell is this place? At 1,600 feet, the fog began to glow. A dull, amber light pulsed from somewhere above, flickering like the heart of a dying star. Ethan's instincts screamed at him to turn back, but the thought of his debt, that suffocating number, kept him going. Every pound felt like a weight pressing between his shoulders, driving him higher. The wind intensified, roaring through the girders like a storm. Each gust sent the entire structure shuddering beneath him. The vibrations made his teeth ache. Then he heard it, faint at first, then clearer. A voice, feminine, trembling, echoing through the steel. "Ethan." He froze. "Who's there?" "You shouldn't be here." His pulse spiked. The voice came from above, close, soft, almost sorrowful. He craned his neck upward, scanning the metal maze. Nothing, only that pulsing amber light. "Show yourself," he shouted, gripping the frame for balance. The voice answered with a whisper that chilled his blood. "He's waiting." And then silence. Ethan's breath came fast. He tried to steady himself. "Just wind," he muttered. "Just wind and exhaustion." But deep down he knew the truth. Something on this tower knew his name. By the time he reached 2,000 feet, the fog had thickened into a sea of swirling grey. The world below was gone, and the air smelled faintly of ozone and ash. Lightning flashed somewhere distant, illuminating the skeletal shape of the tower against the storm. He reached another platform and pulled himself onto it, panting. His hands shook as he unclipped his harness to rest. The metal beneath him was warm, unnaturally so. He frowned, touching it. The vibration beneath the surface wasn't mechanical. It felt organic. Then he noticed the symbols. Carved into the beams, shallow etchings arranged in spirals. The same spiral he'd seen on the black key. Hundreds of them, burned into the steel like brands. He took out his flashlight, tracing the nearest spiral. Inside its loop were words archaic, almost Latin, though twisted beyond recognition. Vordath exsurgit, vox tenebrarum. Ethan's Latin was rusty, but he caught fragments. Vordath rises, the voice of darkness. His stomach tightened. He reached into his pocket, taking out the black key. Under the flashlight, it seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. As he turned it, he noticed a faint pulse, a heartbeat, synchronized with the tower's hum. He wanted to throw it away. Instead, he clipped it back to his belt and forced himself upward again. At 2,200 feet, the air began to shimmer. The world bent slightly at the edges like heat distortion on asphalt. The wind had changed too. It wasn't just blowing, it was whispering. He could hear words now, clearer than before. Caldwell climb. Almost there. We're still here. The voices multiplied until they became a chorus. Male, female, young, old, dozens, maybe hundreds. They were everywhere, trapped inside the tower's bones. He stopped climbing, his vision blurred. The steel beneath his hands seemed to pulse in rhythm with the voices. "Stop it," he shouted, shaking his head. "Get out of my head." The wind exploded in response, howling so loud it drowned out his scream. For a moment, he thought he saw faces in the fog, fleeting, human shapes writhing just beyond the metal bars. Then silence again. He hung there, trembling, his body slick with sweat despite the freezing air. Somewhere above, the amber light flared brighter like a beacon. He forced himself upward. His arms screamed in protest. His breath ragged. Every muscle in his body begged him to stop. But he didn't, he couldn't. Whatever waited at the top, he needed to see it, needed to finish what he'd started. Finally, after what felt like hours, Ethan pulled himself onto the final platform. The fog parted just enough to reveal a flat surface surrounded by skeletal beams, and at its center, an altar. It was impossible. A slab of stone set into the heart of a steel tower, ancient, cracked, covered in the same spiraling carvings. Charred marks surrounded it, as though something had burned here long ago. Ethan staggered toward it, disbelief and fear warring inside him. On the altar lay a sheet of parchment, undisturbed by the wind. He picked it up with shaking hands. His heart stopped. His name was written across the top. Ethan Caldwell. Below it, debt, £92,315. His mouth went dry. Beneath the numbers, another line read. Draw the mark, bleed, ignite, summon Vordath, the screaming one. He dropped the parchment like it had burned him. "What the hell is this?" he whispered. The wind rose again, a low, throbbing hum that made the tower tremble. The black key at his belt began to glow faintly, its spiral rotating on its own. Ethan's fear twisted into anger. "You've got to be kidding me. You brought me up here for some kind of sick game." The only answer was the groan of the steel, and the pulse beneath the altar, deep, alive. Then he heard the sound of footsteps behind him. Slow, heavy, climbing the last few rungs. Ethan turned toward the edge, heart pounding. Through the fog, a figure was emerging, pale skin, black coat, eyes like hollow glass. The man from the pub. He shouldn't have been able to follow. No ropes, no harness, no human could climb that fast. Yet there he was, stepping onto the platform as if the tower itself had lifted him. "Mr. Caldwell," the man said, voice calm despite the storm. "You've done well. The ascent is complete." Ethan backed away. "What is this place? What's happening?" The man smiled faintly, his grey eyes gleaming. "The beginning of payment. The altar awaits." Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. "Payment for what?" "For your debt," the man said, "and for what must be awakened." The tower groaned again, a sound like breath. And beneath Ethan's boots, something ancient began to stir. Part 3, The Ritual and the Awakening. The tower trembled beneath his feet. Each beam groaned like a living rib cage, flexing in rhythm with the wind's scream. The man from the Umbra Network stood at the altar, his coat unmoving despite the gale, his eyes still pools of grey. "You've reached the summit," he said. "Now comes the offering." Ethan's breath came in shallow bursts. "I didn't agree to any ritual. You said this was a climb, not..." "Every ascent," the man interrupted, "is a sacrifice. You've given your strength. Now your blood will open the way." The words were matter of fact, not cruel, and that made them worse. Ethan took a step back, scanning the platform. There was no way down now. The fog had swallowed the ladder entirely. The world below was gone. Only the endless moorland sky stretched around him, bleeding grey into black. He looked at the altar again. The spirals carved into the stone were no longer static. They shifted subtly, writhing like snakes under the surface. The center pulsed with faint red light, like a heartbeat buried in rock. "What happens if I refuse?" Ethan asked, voice tight. The man tilted his head. "Refusal changes nothing. The debt must be paid. Your name is already written." He gestured to the parchment still lying on the altar. It fluttered once, though there was no breeze. Ethan felt a cold pressure in his chest, like invisible hands tightening around his ribs. The air grew thick, humming. The tower vibrated under him as though the metal itself wanted to collapse inward. "Make your mark," the man said, "or the tower will take it from you." Ethan's hands trembled. He looked down at the black key clipped to his belt, glowing faintly, pulsing with the same rhythm as the altar. His instincts screamed at him to run, to jump, to end it before it began, but there was nowhere left to go. He stepped forward. The stone was warm under his gloves. He pulled out a piece of charcoal from the small kit he carried, his standard emergency pack for mountain markings. It felt absurd, almost laughable, to use something so mundane for something this wrong. Still, he obeyed. He traced the spiral symbol, each line darker than the last. As the charcoal moved, the stone seemed to drink it in, glowing faintly along the edges. When the final curve closed, the mark began to pulse, slow, steady, alive. "Now," the man said softly, "the blood." Ethan's throat tightened. He looked up, anger and terror colliding. "You're insane." But the man only smiled. "Debt is written in blood, Mr. Caldwell. You of all people should know that." Something inside Ethan snapped. Rage overcame fear. He pulled the knife from his climbing harness, turned it toward the stranger, but the man didn't flinch. Instead, he said, "You can cut me if it makes you feel in control. It won't change what's coming." Ethan hesitated. The knife trembled in his hand. And then, slowly, he turned the blade toward himself. He dragged the edge across his palm, shallow but enough. Blood welled, dark and hot. He watched, breath shaking, as it dripped onto the altar. The reaction was instant. The stone screamed. A deep, metallic roar burst through the tower, shaking every beam. The blood sizzled, seeping into the carvings, spreading outward in bright crimson light. The spirals expanded, the whole altar pulsing like a living organ. The man stepped back, his expression serene, reverent. "It begins." The wind exploded. The fog tore apart as though ripped by invisible claws, revealing a sky that wasn't sky anymore. It churned with colors that didn't belong to this world. Black flame, violet lightning, streaks of sickly green. Ethan stumbled back, clutching his bleeding hand. The tower around him seemed to grow, stretching, bending, twisting in directions that defied physics. Gravity lost meaning. The ground tilted. Then came the voice. It wasn't sound. It was pressure, a vibration in the skull, a presence that filled every cell of his body. "Who summons the screaming one?" Ethan fell to his knees, covering his ears, though it did nothing to block the sound. The air rippled. Above the tower, something vast began to emerge, a shape within the storm, formed of shadow and flame. The Umbra man raised his arms, exultant. "Vordath, the gate is open." The name struck Ethan like a physical blow. The sound itself seemed to cut through him, cold and infinite. From the swirling sky, a hand the size of a building reached downward, made of darkness, veins of fire running through it. Its fingers clawed into the metal of the tower, sending shockwaves through the structure. Ethan screamed, clutching the altar to stay upright. The metal shrieked under the weight of the impossible. "Stop it," he shouted. "You'll bring this whole thing down." The Umbra man didn't answer. His eyes were gone, replaced by black fire. His body trembled, smoke pouring from his mouth as he whispered words that no human throat should form. The tower's lights, long-dead signal lamps, flickered to life, one by one burning crimson. The whole structure had become a beacon, summoning something ancient. And then light. A burst so bright it turned the world white. Ethan threw himself to the ground, shielding his eyes. A second figure descended through the clouds, radiant, blinding, wreathed in wings made of living flame. The air around it shimmered with heat and sound, a harmonic hum that made the darkness recoil. The Umbra man staggered back, hissing. The being's voice cut through the storm like a blade. "Ethan Caldwell." Ethan looked up, half-blind, trembling. "Who, what are you?" "Judgment." The being's face shifted constantly, features burning and reforming, sometimes male, sometimes female, sometimes neither. Its wings stretched wide, scattering embers that hung in the air like stars. "You opened the gate of the Screaming One. Do you know what you've done?" Ethan shook his head, struggling to stand. "I didn't know he tricked me." The angel's gaze pierced through him. "Ignorance does not absolve guilt." Behind it, the sky split open completely. The colossal form of Vordath rose from the storm, a nightmare given flesh. Its eyes were pits of burning void, its voice a low thunder that shook the bones of the earth. "Mortal flesh calls to me," it growled. "A debt paid in blood is mine to claim." Ethan backed away, heart hammering. No, this isn't real. But the angel was already raising its hand. He cannot claim what is protected by light. Step away from the altar. The Umbra man turned, face twisted by something unhuman. He belongs to the pact. The blood was given, the name signed. The angel's wings ignited, burning pure gold. Then let the pact burn. It struck its hand against the altar. The resulting blast threw Ethan backward, slamming him into the railing. Sparks exploded around him, metal screeching as the tower split down the middle. The Umbra man screamed, not in pain but fury, as light consumed him, leaving only a silhouette that crumbled into ash. For a moment the storm above seemed to recoil, the giant shape of Vordath drawing back into the clouds. But it wasn't retreat, it was gathering. Ethan dragged himself to his knees, coughing. The angel turned toward him, eyes fierce but sorrowful. "You must close the gate." "How?" Ethan shouted. "Tell me what to do." "The key, the one you carry, it binds the breach." He fumbled for the black key, it pulsed violently, as if alive. The spiral symbol on its surface twisted faster, releasing faint tendrils of smoke. "Place it in the heart of the altar," the angel commanded. "Do it now." Ethan hesitated. The altar was cracking open, bleeding light and shadow. Every instinct told him not to go near it. But he forced himself forward. Each step felt like wadding through molasses, the air heavy, alive with voices screaming from beyond the veil. He reached the center. The stone glowed red-hot beneath his boots. He raised the key. Then a voice, deep, terrible, filled his mind. "Give it to me, Ethancaldwell. I will erase your debt, your pain, your name." Vordath's face took shape in the storm, enormous, formless, shifting. Its many eyes opened, staring directly into him. Ethan froze, his heart pounded. The temptation was a physical thing whispering inside his skull. No more guilt, no more fear, no more debt. The angel's voice cut through, fierce and urgent. "Do not listen, that promise is a lie." Vordath's voice turned silky. "I can make you more than mortal, climb no more, ascend." Ethan's grip on the key faltered. The storm howled. His mind fractured between light and shadow, guilt and desire. And then through the chaos he saw it, his reflection in the altar's surface. Tired eyes, scarred hands, a man who had run from everything except himself. He gritted his teeth. No deals, not again. With a roar, he drove the key into the altar's core. The reaction was instant, a blinding surge of light and sound. The tower convulsed, every beam screamed. The spirals flared once, then shattered. Vordath let out a roar that split the heavens. The angel spread its wings wide, covering Ethan as the explosion of divine fire tore through the storm. And then silence. The light faded, the wind stopped. Ethan fell forward, collapsing beside the shattered altar. The black key lay beside him, now dull, lifeless. The angel knelt over him, its voice softer now, almost human. "The gate is sealed, but the price is yours to bear." Ethan looked up, eyes heavy. "What price?" The angel smiled, a tragic, knowing smile. "Your climb is over." And then, like sunlight dissolving fog, it vanished. Ethan's vision blurred. The world tilted. The tower beneath him began to crumble, piece by piece, falling into the void below. He closed his eyes, feeling the wind lift him one final time. And he fell. Part 4, The Descent and the Aftermath. For the first time in hours, or maybe eternity, there was no wind, no thunder, no screaming metal. Only a strange stillness, soft and weightless, as if the world itself had stopped to catch its breath. Ethan drifted through it, suspended somewhere between sky and void. Fragments of light and shadow spun around him, twisting into shapes he almost recognized. Faces, moments, debts unpaid. The tower was gone. The angel gone, the storm gone. Only the fall remained. Then impact. Pain bloomed across his body like fire under his skin. He gasped, the breath torn from his lungs as he hit something solid, grass, damp and cold. For several long seconds he lay there, eyes half open, staring up at the pale sky. Morning had come. The moorland stretched endlessly around him, shrouded in thin mist. His tower, was nowhere to be seen. Only a flattened circle of earth remained, blackened as if something vast had burned itself out there. He tried to move. Pain flared in his ribs, sharp and real. His right arm hung limp. Every breath was an effort. Ethan rolled onto his side, coughing. Blood filled his mouth, metallic and bitter. He spat it out and stared at the red against the frost-covered grass. Alive, somehow still alive. He laughed once, short, dry, disbelieving. "Guess I didn't pay enough," he muttered. The sky above was a washed-out grey, heavy with silence. No birds, no wind. Even the distant hum of civilization was gone. It was as if the moor had been carved out of time itself. He forced himself to his knees. His pack was torn, half buried in the mud a few meters away. He crawled toward it, wincing with each movement. When he reached it, he found the zipper open, the contents scattered, rope, flashlight, compass. But one thing was different. The black key lay on the ground beside it. He froze. It was cracked down the middle, its spiral design broken, but it still pulsed faintly, a dying heartbeat of dark light. Ethan stared at it for a long moment. "You should have stayed gone," he whispered. He picked it up, the cold biting through his skin, and shoved it deep into his pocket. Then he looked around again. No sign of the tower, no sign of the Umbra man, no sign of the altar. Just the moor, endless and empty. He stumbled to his feet. His left leg buckled, nearly sending him down again. He steadied himself on a jagged rock and began walking. Each step left a faint trail of blood in the frost. Somewhere in the distance, a shape emerged through the fog, his van. It was parked where he'd left it the night before, near the broken fence line. For a second, the sight almost felt comforting, absurdly mundane. He limped toward it, every movement a war. By the time he reached the van, his vision had begun to blur. He gripped the door handle, fumbled it open, and collapsed into the driver's seat. The faint scent of oil and old coffee filled his nose. "Home sweet home," he rasped. He sat there for a long moment, head against the steering wheel, trying to steady his breathing. The engine key still hung in the ignition. Out of habit, he turned it. Nothing. Dead. He laughed again, weaker this time. Figures. The glove compartment hung open, spilling receipts and old notes. Among them a small notebook, his climb log. He reached for it, his fingers trembling. Inside were sketches of cliffs, gear checklists, names of routes he'd conquered. At the back of the notebook, he tore out a blank page. He fumbled for a pen, found one under the seat. The first few letters came shaky, uneven, but he forced them out. "To whoever finds this. The Umbra Network is real. They know things they shouldn't. Debts, sins, secrets. They find people like me, the desperate ones, and offer a way out. But it's a trap, a gate. There's something out there called Vordath. I saw it, felt it. It's not human, not divine. It feeds on promises, on blood. If they ask you to climb, to sign, to summon, don't. Whatever they offer isn't worth what they take. I sealed it, I think, but I can still hear it. Whispering, waiting, if you find this, burn it, forget the name, don't let them reopen the gate." He dropped the pen. His hand was slick with blood from his palm wound. It had reopened. The page was streaked with red where his fingers brushed it. He stared at the words, then folded the paper carefully and tucked it into the glove compartment. Outside, the fog began to move again, slowly curling around the van. Shapes flickered at the edge of his vision, dark silhouettes that vanished when he turned his head. "Not real," he whispered. "You're not real." But then, faintly, he heard it. A low, distant hum, mechanical, rhythmic. He looked up. Across the moor in the farthest reaches of the mist, a red light blinked once, then again. His heart stopped. A radio tower, another one. Ethan stared, disbelief washing over him like cold water. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, looked again. The light was still there, steady, pulsing like a heartbeat. "No," he murmured. No, it's gone, I saw it fall." But the light blinked again. And this time, beneath the hum, he heard a faint voice, static-filled, half-whispered. "Ethan Caldwell, the debt remains." He froze, his breath hitched. His reflection in the cracked windshield looked pale, ghost-like. Then the voice faded. Silence returned. Ethan slumped back in his seat, shaking. The cold seeped through the van's thin metal walls. He could feel his strength slipping, like sand running out of a broken hourglass. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the broken key. It flickered one last time, then crumbled to ash in his palm. The wind began to rise again, faint but familiar. It whispered through the cracked windows, carrying something that might have been a word or might have been nothing. Ethan smiled faintly. Guess that's my cue. He leaned back, closed his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt calm. No panic, no guilt, no climbing, no falling. Just the quiet hum of the world returning to itself. His breathing slowed. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the van until it was just a dark shape in the grey. The moor fell silent once more. Minutes or hours later, the wind shifted again. A car appeared on the distant road, headlights cutting through the mist. It slowed when it reached the fence, the beam catching the van's outline. A man stepped out, a hiker in a heavy coat. He approached cautiously, peered inside. Ethan sat slumped in the driver's seat, eyes closed, face peaceful. In the glove compartment, the folded page waited, marked with faint traces of blood. The hiker hesitated, then reached in, took the paper and unfolded it. He read the first line, his brow furrowed. Umbra Network. Behind him, across the moor, the red light blinked again. Once, twice. Then faintly a hum rose in the distance, soft, steady, mechanical. The man turned, squinting into the fog. Must be another tower, he murmured. He pocketed the note, unaware that the ink was still damp. And as he walked away, the light in the distance blinked faster, like something waking up. Epilogue: the signal never dies. London, 6 weeks later. A rainstorm prowled over the city, drenching glass towers and empty streets in sheets of silver. Lightning flashed across the Thames, briefly illuminating the skyline like a heartbeat. Deep beneath the city, far from the noise and light, an elevator descended into the substructure of an old government facility. Its walls were lined with concrete and cables, its hum constant and low. Inside, 2 figures stood in silence. One of them, tall and thin, wore a long black coat. His eyes, grey, empty, reflected nothing. The other, younger, held a tablet glowing faintly in the dark. Transmission confirmed, the younger man said, his voice barely audible over the hum. Origin point, Northern Moors, approximately 2 miles from the old relay site. Duration, 4 seconds. The older man tilted his head slightly. Audio integrity. Distorted, sir, mostly static, but there was a word, faint. The young man hesitated. Vordath. The man in the coat smiled, a thin, bloodless curve. He spoke again. Yes, sir, it's faint, but the signal, it's evolving. It's no longer analog. It's migrating through digital bands, satellite frequencies, even encrypted military channels. A pause. Then the breach wasn't sealed, the older man said quietly. He stepped out of the elevator as the doors opened with a soft hiss. Beyond lay a cavernous chamber filled with machines, rows of servers, walls lined with screens flickering with lines of code and radar maps. At the center stood a massive console, its surface glowing with a pulsing spiral pattern. The same symbol that had been etched on the black key. Bring up the feed, he said. The younger man obeyed. One of the screens flickered to life, displaying a live satellite image of the Yorkshire moors. Nothing but fog and marshland, empty, lifeless. But then, faintly, a red light blinked. Impossible, the technician whispered. There's nothing built there anymore, the structure's gone. The older man's eyes narrowed. Structures can fall, signals don't. He turned, walking toward a glass chamber at the far end of the room. Inside it, illuminated by a cold white light, lay a sealed metal case. On its surface was a tag, CALDWELL. He placed his hand on the glass. For a moment, something inside the case shimmered, a faint pulse like breath. The debt was paid, the younger man said uncertainly. Debts change shape, the older one replied. They don't disappear. He straightened, his reflection fracturing across the glass like broken light. Prepare another candidate. The technician hesitated. Sir, we lost 6 climbers before Caldwell, if he couldn't. Caldwell succeeded, the man interrupted softly. He opened the gate. Now we only need someone willing to keep it open. He turned back toward the spiral console. The lights around it began to flicker, one by one, as if responding to something unseen. Start the transmission sequence, he said. The technician swallowed hard. What frequency? The man's grey eyes glimmered with something almost human, the same one he used. He paused, then added quietly, almost reverently, "Let the hum begin." The lights dimmed. The servers roared to life, their mechanical voices merging into a single, deep resonance that filled the chamber. On the screens, the spiral began to spin faster, faster, until it became a blur of light. Far above, through the storm over London, radios crackled, cell towers flickered. And across the moors of Yorkshire, unseen in the fog, a faint red light began to blink again. Once, twice, steady. The signal had found its way home. Epilogue: the signal never dies. London, 6 weeks later. A rainstorm prowled over the city, drenching glass towers and empty streets in sheets of silver. Lightning flashed across the Thames, briefly illuminating the skyline like a heartbeat. Deep beneath the city, far from the noise and light, an elevator descended into the substructure of an old government facility. Its walls were lined with concrete and cables, its hum constant and low. Inside, 2 figures stood in silence. One of them, tall and thin, wore a long black coat. His eyes, grey, empty, reflected nothing. The other, younger, held a tablet glowing faintly in the dark. "Transmission confirmed," the younger man said, his voice barely audible over the hum. "Origin point, Northern Moors, approximately 2 miles from the old relay site. Duration, 4 seconds. The older man tilted his head slightly. "Audio integrity." "Distorted, sir, mostly static, but there was a word, faint." The young man hesitated. "Vordath." The man in the coat smiled, a thin, bloodless curve. He spoke again. "Yes, sir, it's faint, but the signal, it's evolving. It's no longer analog. It's migrating through digital bands, satellite frequencies, even encrypted military channels." A pause. Then the breach wasn't sealed, the older man said quietly. He stepped out of the elevator as the doors opened with a soft hiss. Beyond lay a cavernous chamber filled with machines, rows of servers, walls lined with screens flickering with lines of code and radar maps. At the center stood a massive console, its surface glowing with a pulsing spiral pattern. The same symbol that had been etched on the black key. "Bring up the feed," he said. The younger man obeyed. One of the screens flickered to life, displaying a live satellite image of the Yorkshire moors. Nothing but fog and marshland, empty, lifeless. But then, faintly, a red light blinked. "Impossible," the technician whispered. "There's nothing built there anymore, the structure's gone." The older man's eyes narrowed. "Structures can fall, signals don't." He turned, walking toward a glass chamber at the far end of the room. Inside it, illuminated by a cold white light, lay a sealed metal case. On its surface was a tag, CALDWELL. He placed his hand on the glass. For a moment, something inside the case shimmered, a faint pulse like breath. "The debt was paid," the younger man said uncertainly. "Debts change shape," the older one replied. "They don't disappear." He straightened, his reflection fracturing across the glass like broken light. "Prepare another candidate." The technician hesitated. "Sir, we lost 6 climbers before Caldwell, if he couldn't." "Caldwell succeeded," the man interrupted softly. "He opened the gate. Now we only need someone willing to keep it open." He turned back toward the spiral console. The lights around it began to flicker, one by one, as if responding to something unseen. "Start the transmission sequence," he said. The technician swallowed hard. "What frequency?" The man's grey eyes glimmered with something almost human, the same one he used. He paused, then added quietly, almost reverently, "Let the hum begin." The lights dimmed. The servers roared to life, their mechanical voices merging into a single, deep resonance that filled the chamber. On the screens, the spiral began to spin faster, faster, until it became a blur of light. Far above, through the storm over London, radios crackled, cell towers flickered. And across the moors of Yorkshire, unseen in the fog, a faint red light began to blink again. Once, twice, steady. The signal had found its way home,